I'm Jim Walker with Big Heart Collaborative. Welcome to Social Alchemy Symposium. See a lot of friends out there. Thank you for being here. This is Chate Marsh, and the two of us are with Big Heart. We're co-founders of Big Heart and have been working on the symposium with some partners we're going to talk about in a second. But do you want to start?
So thank you all for being here. This has been a long time coming, and I think it's especially important coming out of the pandemic to bring, we're not out of it, but to bring everyone together. We do want to acknowledge that we are on native land, no matter where we are, here in person or out in Zoom land. So without further ado, I want to bring, no? Oh, okay.
Here's a little further ado, sorry. If you haven't figured this out, just a couple logistics things. You can go to bigheart.org/social-alchemy to get all the speaker bios. So we have just a simple card downstairs and not a whole booklet of printing. So that will happen. There are 2 tours tonight to sign up for downstairs. One is Kent Schuette's doing a tour of Gardens and Labyrinths that you can sign up for free. And the second one is a ghost tour of New Harmony. Kent's is at 8 and the ghost tour is at 9:30. The ghost tour is $15. Also, that's all the announcements. We have a few thank yous. We want to thank the community. We also want to thank our speakers and attendees who are here, who came in from out of town, and everybody who's been working on this project. We also want to thank and acknowledge the people from the history of New Harmony, going way back, and also prehistory. And we also want to thank the people here in town who are continuing to care for this place. We also want to thank our partners. This is the University of Southern Indiana, Historic New Harmony, and the New Harmony Gallery of Contemporary Art, where we hosted our event last night. We've been working together. We also want to thank our supporters, sponsors. So first of all, Indiana Humanities, who gave us a grant to do the symposium. And we're going to have Kira come up here, as well as Jeremy, if you guys want to start coming up. We also want to thank Ephraimson Family Fund and Jeremy Ephraimson and New America for financial support and partnership that made this possible. So let's welcome Jeremy Ephraimson and Kira Amstutz. And Jeremy's going to go first, and then Kira.
Hey, right here. Oh, there? Okay. Yeah. So I was getting ready to sit down. Oh, okay. Hey, welcome everybody. I rehearsed my speech, and it's only slightly over 2 hours. So, anyways, I guess this is kind of like welcome to New Harmony and welcome to Social Alchemy. And this is that bad part in every speech where they're like, I looked up the definition of social alchemy in Merriam-Webster dictionary, and anyways, no one here knew what social alchemy meant, and so I actually did look it up, and all it says is turning bad things into good things. And so, yeah, it seemed like really kind of spooky or whatever. But anyways, so this conference has some of that in it, and some of utopian things and dystopian things for any of you who've read Station 11. But I was just gonna say, my experience with New Harmony, I've been coming here for 30 years. I read an article in Arts Indiana magazine 30 years ago, and it said, New Harmony, you better get here quick and get your property or whatever, because it's gonna turn into the next bedroom community of Evansville, and they're building condos. I know the condos they're talking about. They built 3. But it was there's gonna be condo buildings and subdivisions, and anyways, but it really hasn't quite turned out that way. And I also remember people now talk about how people in New Harmony are getting old, and there's no young people, and we can go into a whole nother conversation about not having affordable housing, but that's another thing. But then I was reading this book by this historian named James Madison, who was from IU Bloomington, and he wrote a book in the 1960s about New Harmony, and it was the same thing. It's like there's no young people here, everybody's old, and that was obviously 60 years ago. So we're all still here, you know. But anyways, and then, you know, my only other piece of advice, which I was trying to tell someone yesterday, or I told several people, is like, you can never remember like what restaurant is open on what day here, because everything's always, you know, like, and then I told like several people that Sarah's was closed today, and sure enough, this morning I drive up to Sarah's to go to get breakfast, and I'm like, wait a minute, I just told all these people that Sarah's is closed today. So I guess that's my piece of advice, like try and remember what restaurant is open on what day. Yellow's closed on Sunday, Legion's closed Sunday and Monday, but now they're serving, what? But now they're serving breakfast, so the main street is now at Capers, you know, and anyways. So just everybody, welcome to Social Alchemy and welcome to New Harmony. Thanks.
Oh my gosh, good morning, everybody. I'm Kira Amstutz from Indiana Humanities, and clearly shorter than all the rest of the presenters. I am actually here on behalf of my colleague George Hanlon as well, because this particular grant that supported the program today was his brainchild. Many years ago, again, this project has been in the works for a while, right, Shate? We decided at Indiana Humanities, many of our grants are smaller, and we decided to start experimenting with some larger grants to really focus on collaboration and innovation. And so we put out the call, and we invited different community groups to come together and imagine what they could do together to make something bigger and better, using the humanities at the center of the work. And we were blown away by this proposal. We are honored to be here to see it in person come together. It was a great partnership between, obviously, the folks who work and care for this community on a regular basis, and then our friends at Big Car and many others. So it was exactly the kind of project we imagined, and it's wonderful to see it all come together today. I probably should have mentioned Indiana Humanities is a statewide nonprofit organization, and we are a grant maker, and we do programs in the public humanities. So we are delighted to be here. I will be very brief because I know we want to get to the program, but thank you everyone who made this happen. It's wonderful to be in person with you. Bye.
Laura, Chris, and Shate we're going to talk, and I'm going to kind of help facilitate a little bit. We're going to talk about connections between, I need to get on the mic, I guess.
We're going to talk about connections between some of the projects that are happening in different size communities. So hopefully my little clicker will work. And we have some slides from each person. One of the things about the Social Alchemy project, it's more than the symposium, it's also about linking work and thinking between our Indianapolis community, because a lot of you are from Indianapolis, and then also projects that are happening in other places, as well as what's happening here. Okay, so Laura, and I'm not going to introduce everybody, I'm just going to let you all introduce yourselves briefly, and then if you want to talk about what we're going to talk about today.
My name's Laura Arneberg. My family moved here when I was 10, so by local standards, I am not local because my family hasn't been here since the 1800s, but I did grow up here. And then I went to USI, graduated from New Harmony High School, which no longer exists, but I went to USI, double majored in economics and international relations. Went to India for a year, thought I'd get my master's in international relations, decided I didn't want to do that. Came back to New Harmony and took the next logical step and opened a restaurant. Ran a small business here for a couple years. I took the next logical step and got into community development because I live here, so everybody is in community development. And with Jeremy's help, when the bridge closed in 2012, we started trying to find a new way the original idea was to restore and repurpose, which now it's turned more into a traditional traffic bridge again, just because of financial needs. But at the same time, in parallel, I was running the Visit New Harmony project. So if I give any of you a business card today, it's going to say that. I don't do that anymore, but I was at the time. So we were trying to kind of professionalize and kind of make more standard the CVB in town for tourism purposes. And then this and the closure of the school became kind of the two big infrastructure pieces of the community that really needed help. The bridge had been owned in a federally appointed commission since it was built in the 30s. So when these bridges were originally built, the federal government or a private company would build them, and then they would toll them until it paid for the building, and then they would hand them over to the states on either side of the river. And ours, as New Harmony is always unique, was the only one where both states were like, no, we're good, thanks, you can keep it. So then we got to 2012 and they ran out of money, and they were like, well, nobody owns it, guess it's just gonna sit there. So I'm thankful at this point, but at the time I went to Jeremy and some other people and said, can we have money and we'll fix the bridge and just leave it like it is, because that'd be easy. And they said, no, you need to find a more professional way of managing the bridge, which led to talking to the folks in Louisville about their pedestrian bridge and figuring out how they legally did it. And that led to creating 2 new state authorities and federal legislation to get the ownership back in local hands so we could do something with it permanently, which is where we're at now, applying for $25 million in federal funding to get it back up and running, and it will be in local hands where we'd have local control of it. And now professionally I do real estate.
And one of the things you're working on, besides just to kind of go through the rest of the slides that you had, is you're looking at some affordable housing ideas in town.
So that's the real estate, my real estate hat, and it goes with the school. There's one area of New Harmony, only one that was ever platted and never built out, and it is right next to the school. And there's 14 lots there that do not currently have a road, so it just looks like a giant field, but that's the next evolution.
Great.
Yep.
Okay, so Chate, do you want to talk a little bit about this program that you run of ours that's the Artists in Public Life Residency Program?
Yes, so this is the Artist Public Life Housing Residency Program, and basically it's affordable artist housing. When we first started working in the arts, there were several times just ourselves or our friends, our different organizations were displaced when we had been part of improving, quote unquote, a neighborhood, and weren't able to afford rent or space. So when we were able to purchase properties, we wanted to ensure that people, especially artists, could afford to live in the neighborhood for as long as Big Car exists, at least. So this is where our research into New Harmony figured in as well. Jeremy bought a house here, and I came down here, and Jim came down here, and we were like, whoa, this is something worth looking into, looking at planned communities, what failed, even though it was so long ago historically. Did you want to?
Well, I was just going to say, this is the neighborhood that we're in, and the size of our neighborhood zone is not very much different than the size of New Harmony in terms of its population.
Yeah. So how it works is we don't do credit checks and we don't do income checks. The program is weighted to serve artists of color who have been historically discriminated against in terms of housing. And we currently have 16 houses, those 17 units, one of them's a double. And we also learned through the process is that that people, even though it's a community land trust model, a lot of times artists are sacrificing income to create, to be doing something with their life that they really believe in. So that means they aren't always taking care of themselves financially. And this happened. This happened in partnership with Riley Area Development, because Big Car's an arts organization. We didn't have property up until this point, so it was important for us to work with a community development corporation, which was Riley Area, and also the Indiana Neighborhood Housing Partnership, INHP. So there's two models. There's the ownership piece where Big Car and Riley area own 51% of the house, and the artist owns 49% of the house, which means they get a mortgage for what half of the house cost is. And INHP is a lot different than a regular bank. They have more lenient lending practices. But even with those lenient lending practices, we ran into a situation where people still weren't qualifying for the loans. So that's why we started adding rental properties to the mix, and then they work with INHP to improve, to get ready to improve their credit score, and get in the position to purchase a home. Now that might be in the program or it might not. So that's also looking at the rentals are around between currently 40 to 60% off market rate because housing prices have just been driven up significantly during the pandemic.
Talk about the exchange piece.
Yeah, and there's also an exchange. So we weren't doing income or credit checks or any of that, but we did ask that artists fill out these surveys and talking about their art and community and using their art to work in community. So, yeah, this is, there's Sean and I and Jason, Jason, and Jared. Jared's one of the artists in the artist housing residency program. So this is a project we do every year with a group called TeenWorks. I'm a huge fan of TeenWorks. It's not my program. It's a program it's a program partner, sorry, with the Glick, I think the Glick.
Marianne Glick
started TeenWorks. So TeenWorks it works with sometimes for like disenfranchised youth to give them summer employment, teach them how to make resumes, prepare them for college and or the workforce in general. So TeenWorks, we do these big projects. Sean works with them on the radio station and teaches them editing and broadcasting because we also have a radio station, a low power FM radio station. And then Jason Gray, he builds things with them and teaches them how to use power tools. And you wouldn't believe how many people haven't handled a drill ever. So, showing people how to use power tools and drills and measure and taking those skills moving forward as they move into their own lives has just been really important experience just for me as well.
So part of what the artists do in exchange for the discounted housing ownership or rental is give time to work with like the teenagers. And so Rob Funkhauser, who's right down here, this is Rob on his porch. So Rob is one of the artists in residence too. And so Rob was doing during the pandemic concerts on his porch and is also here helping us.
Yeah, so and when we say artists, we're talking, I consider beauticians artists. I consider chefs artists. So we're looking at basically the creative class.
Yeah, and this is the latest house that we finished here. We should note that this program has been supported by a whole variety of funders. Ephraimson Family Fund, Jeremy was in on one of the houses earlier right off the bat, and then also support from the Glicks and from the Herbert Simon Family Foundation, from a Lilly Endowment, and INHP.
Yeah. And
Les, go ahead, finish this up.
Yeah, so basically this project has been greatly informed by our learning connected to New Harmony, and thank you, New Harmony.
Yeah. Okay, so now, this is I think the slides might have been out of the way, but this is like what we're working on now. So if you come to visit, there's a central green space that's in the middle of kind of like the central market of the block. Now we're to Chris.
Good transition.
Yeah.
I'm Chris Merritt. Nice to see you all. It's my first time in New Harmony. I'm a landscape architect and founding principal with Merritt Chase. We're based in Indianapolis and Pittsburgh and work all over the Midwest. It's a treat for me to be here today. Kent Schutte is a former professor of mine, as is David Rubin, and also a kind of North Star in the profession for us. So I have a little anxiety presenting in front of former professors. It's like presenting my final projects again, but it's nice to be here. We're really interested in projects that have kind of long legacies of people kind of stewarding these landscapes and have some kind of cultural significance behind them. Often in kind of socially complicated areas where we're working with communities. We do mainly public and institutional projects, projects that have interesting kind of history to tell. Sometimes that history has been kind of erased or ignored, and we're trying to bring some of that back. And often kind of ecological environments that aren't very healthy, and we're trying to restore or renew that. And then infrastructure that has often been designed to kind of separate communities. So the project here is a project we've been working on in Cleveland. It's for a historic house museum that you can see in the middle of the image that was built in 1824. It's the oldest house or oldest building in Cleveland, and they tell a kind of early pioneer settler story, and it's within the context of the Cleveland Foundation, the community foundation, is building a new headquarters there. And as part of that, trying to work with the museum campus to kind of reimagine their grounds and tell a new kind of story about not just who they are and kind of preserving their history, but neighborhood history and the kind of city's history and the neighborhood history. So this is a neighborhood that was kind of torn apart by urban renewal, and so there's been a lot of new investment happening there. And the Cleveland Foundation, in particular, has a kind of place-based investment model that they're trying to bring to this area. So we've been working on a kind of public realm plan for the district and working with the museum and their board to kind of understand their audience and broadening that audience by telling new kind of stories. But part of this was really engaging with the neighborhood and working with the neighborhood to understand their relationship or lack of relationship with the museum and kind of perceptions of not feeling very welcomed on the campus. And to the museum's credit, they kind of acknowledged that and wanted to reimagine the campus. So that's the museum itself. It was a tavern and stagecoach, a stop for a long time, and was kind of preserved as a museum to tell that kind of story. But as part of our process, we're always taking a kind of broader view and thinking about the history of a place and the stories we can tell. So we worked with the museum to really understand their history as a kind of witness to what was happening in the neighborhood around them and the city around them, and trying to think of how they can tell a different story to engage a more diverse audience. So they were telling the story that's kind of outlined there in the blue, but we were trying to think all the way back to kind of indigenous history and the history of protests in the neighborhood and the folks that have kind of been living there and who we were working with. This has all been done over the past couple of years with the pandemic, and so we were learning how to work on Zoom. Still, we're able to be, in the neighborhood engaging folks. We even did a kind of drive-in presentation, which was quite an experience. But a real, part of our work is, there's this kind of phrase around not designing for, but with communities, and we try to have a real commitment to the Midwest and working locally and trying to be part of a community. And so developing a relationship with the museum, with the neighborhood was really important to us, and we kind of continue that today. So as part of the plan, there's a kind of range of things happening, including this kind of heritage trail loop that would connect a series of the gardens that are there and have been preserved and some of the buildings that are there, but also in some of that engagement and some of our kind of research of the history, developing a series of new kind of cultural gardens across the campus that would begin to open up the campus as more inviting to the neighborhood. So it functions not just as a kind of regional destination for tourism and folks visiting, but also as a kind of neighborhood central park. And some different views of what the campus will look like in the future. We also have this kind of other part of our practice that we've started to get recognized a little bit for, which is part of our process and the way we think about engagement and design, which is you don't just kind of plan and design and then engagement's over and then you build it. We've been doing this work to kind of test, for lack of a better term, this would be called placemaking. But for us, it's really a way to kind of test the design, engage a community in the process. And so we've been doing a lot of these kind of one-to-one scale mock-ups of our design kind of in the real space as a way to get out of formats like this and actually kind of go to the place and feel it and see it. And so this is a kind of Main Street plaza we've been working on in Boston. It's a very narrow one-way street, and all the merchants kind of got together and petitioned the city to close it and turn it into a pedestrian plaza. And so we, through a series of kind of interviews and research, we designed this plaza and pitched this idea of closing it for a week and kind of testing the design in real time. So we spent $3,000 on duct tape and milk crates, and went out there and tested it, and then hosted a lot of events and programming out in the street. For us internally as designers, we're kind of moving things around and testing our ideas. For the community, it's a way to kind of get buy-in and ownership and pride of the space. And for folks in the city too, it's a way to bring the fire department out and make sure things are working right for them and that sort of thing. So this is moving into implementation this year, and has really been a good kind of testing ground for us as a way to think about design process and engagement in the work that we do. And getting real-time feedback in addition to kind of interviews and surveys.
Well, thank you all to all three of you for sharing about your projects. We maybe want to just talk a little bit about, and I think the idea of the test that you just brought up is pretty relevant to all the things that we're doing, and to the history of New Harmony. So when a couple of times we've talked about this already, that when people say these are failed utopias that we're here, you can also have a project like this that goes away and becomes something entirely different, but you learn from the process. And so I think maybe starting with Laura, what do you feel like the town and you yourself have learned from just knowing the history of what work happened here historically, not only with the first two, but also with Jane Owen's work here?
I will misquote this, but at some point I heard someone say something like the most powerful legacy that anyone can leave is ideas. And I think that's certainly true here. I mean, the idea of a failed utopia would be in the absolute sense that it either worked or it didn't. But obviously New Harmony has been left with an incredible legacy that makes it a very special place. I mean, I remember being probably 12 or 13 and just wandering around town and walking through all the gardens on North Street and just assuming that that's how every place is, Get out in the world and go like, oh, this is actually very special. So, I mean, I don't think you can help growing up in a place like this and not, once you leave, understanding that it's very special and that there's, and then it causes you to dig in a little more. I've talked to so many people I grew up with that went to college and learned about Paul Tillich and then came home and realized he was buried here. That sort of thing, and it makes you appreciate what's here. My parents are certainly odd ducks too, because they honeymooned in a Shaker village. So my family's inclined towards history and they're lifelong learners, which is wonderful. But I mean, it certainly made me view the world in a different way, for sure, growing up here and understanding the history of even some of the ideas. I mean, I know more now for sure than I did when I grew up here, but I think for me, especially getting into the field of economics, it's been really interesting coming from a place where there's a very strong history of philanthropy and idealism versus profit motive, and then going to study economics and business and seeing ever more how those two things are evolving and kind of intertwining. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Yeah, Shate, you want to talk a little bit about Jane Owen and how she's learning about her work and experiencing how she shaped the town in more recent years inspires you?
Yeah, so Jane Blaffer Owen, I've been reading about for years and experience, like I think the experience of New Harmony now is in large part because of her infusion of ideas and, down to lighting temperature at night when you walk in New Harmony, paint color, like everything, the way she thought about things and the details. And, she really cared about people because she wanted them to feel good, and she could do that by creating this town and this environment and moving buildings, saving them from the Wabash has continued to change course. So, and not only just with the infrastructure that you can, the buildings, but with soft infrastructure, with programming, with bringing artists and philosophers, designers, Richard Meyer, the building we are in is a Richard Meyer building, and it's based off of the shape of the boatload of knowledge. And the roofless church, which was designed by Philip Johnson and Jacques Lipschitz, who created the gates, these golden gates. And then there's Our Lady of, I think it's Our Lady of Delight. They might have changed her name a few times, but there's actually a triptych of the sculpture that's under the roof part. That's actually 3 sculptures. I have gotten to see one in Iona, but she had a real vision, and I never got to meet her, but I feel lucky in a way that's not in person whenever I come here.
How many people in the room in here knew or met Jane Owen?
Wow.
Great. So for Chris, the project that you showed us in Cleveland is a pretty interesting connection to here. Can you talk a little bit about how you find these commonalities between communities that might be 900 people and might be pretty huge, like Cleveland and Boston or Indianapolis? What do you see at how do things kind of work the same way, and you take a similar approach, or?
Well, there's so many differences too, but I think some of the common themes are there, and what we were just talking about with Jane Blaffer Owen. We're doing a panel on Columbus, Indiana later this afternoon, and I think one of the themes there are, these kind of patrons, benefactors that understand investing in kind of the good design and the built environment leads to better quality of life, regardless of the kind of ideas that you can kind of feel that intentionality. I think I went through the roofless church and realized the yellow magnolia, which is incredible right now, and there's golden rain tree in there. You talked about the golden gates. There's also this kind of within the tree canopy and design. There's also that kind of intentionality, and you can feel that. And I think that's part of. Regardless of scale and project type, that kind of intentionality and investing in people through design of the built environment is also good business, which is, maybe more of the kind of Columbus story too. In Indianapolis, we're working on a kind of, many of you are from Indianapolis, but the south half of Mile Square, a downtown kind of public realm vision plan to understand, it's a lot of our tourism and kind of entertainment district, but there's an aspiration, I think, from the city to understand how a lot of the investment that's happening, what does it kind of add up to for our city, not just as a place to kind of work and visit, but a place to live. And so I think in that way, there's a lot of lessons learned from places like this that have real intentional kind of planning and design for the public realm as the kind of fundamental building block of what connects us to our city and each other.
So a question for all three of you, and we start with Laura and work our way back around to Chris. Your vision for a utopia in a practical way, maybe for, you can do New Harmony, and then if you want to do our neighborhood, and if you can choose wherever you want to talk about. But what would it be like if you could have it be the way you think it should be?
How many people from New Harmony are here before I say this? I think the biggest challenge, I'm just going to speak in a practical way for New Harmony, and it always has been, is the locals versus the people who come here, including Jane and myself really, who are really passionate about and see possibilities here that they want to kind of try on the community. And then the people who grew up here that maybe see less value in hoity-toity artistic silliness. There's some real sincere animosity between especially the amount of money maybe that's spent on some of these projects with people in the community who are really struggling and don't see value in these things, right? Or it doesn't benefit them personally or whatever. So my utopian vision for this community going forward would be to find more peace between those two entities, because there's, I would love to see all the wonderful things that have benefited my life and other people in this community, and why so many people move here, and why the community is still here and thriving economically, because of the cultural assets we have carry over more broadly to everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, for me personally in our work, we always try to take a pretty nuanced kind of place-based approach to where we're working. And so I struggle with the idea of utopia as a kind of general approach to the way we look at places and people and cities and design, though I think there's the idea of kind of the pursuit of that work, I think, is the most interesting, but the idea of kind of reaching perfection, I think, is a challenge. But if I can, I know you're not supposed to do this on a panel, but I brought a quote with me, which I think is a good summary. It's from a book called City on a Hill by Alex Krieger, who's a professor and practitioner, but it's a kind of survey of American urbanization, and I think relevant for utopia. But the Puritans were the first utopians, seeking a new Jerusalem in the New England villages that still stand as models of small-town life. In the age of revolution, Thomas Jefferson dreamed of citizen farmers tending plots laid out across the continent in a grid of enlightened rationality. As industrialization brought urbanization, reformers ensured emerging slums with a zealous crusade of grand civic architecture, and designed the vast urban parks or gardens vital to so many cities today. The 20th century brought cycles of suburban dreaming and urban renewal, a different kind of utopia. One generation's utopia forming the next one's nightmare. And experiments as diverse as Walt Disney's Epcot, hippie communes, and Las Vegas. So as we formulate new ideals today, we're reminded that we chase our visions surrounded by the glories and failures of dreams gone by. So I just feel like that's a good summary of a kind of caution around the idea of utopia.
Yeah, thank you. Chate, do you want to share, so I know you have a vision for the block to be maybe more the folks who are in the program running it, but if you want to think about the block or bigger than that, what would your what would you, kind of your dream for a utopia in that scale be, maybe?
Well, I mean, I don't, I don't believe in utopia. I mean, utopia means no place. Like Chris was saying, I do believe in the pursuit of it, but you have to be open to whatever is happening in the world and how the world changes and how people change. I mean, it's a lot of responsibility where we are right now with the artists in the program, and it's not all figured out. So I think that for me, just having them happy and secure in the program and in the house and how they feel about it, and figuring out the quirks. This is an experiment, and it's going to continue to change as we learn and as we learn from them. So that's how I see this program, is that I have to listen and learn from the artists we're working with.
Great. So I want to see if anybody has any questions out in the audience. We have everybody out there, I see all of you, very smart people. So if anybody has anything you want to ask these three, raise your hand. Yes?
I'd like to take that.
Let me repeat the question, just so if people couldn't hear it on Zoom. So Claire is asking if they're about the religious history and context of New Harmony, and if there needs to be sort of, I'm paraphrasing, shared belief or orientation in terms of that here or in society.
Yeah. So Laura had mentioned Paul Tillich being buried here, and he was a theologian who believed in bringing all people together, people of all beliefs. New Harmony really is, it's full of esoteric art. That's why I was initially attracted to this place. I'm
Explain what you mean by
esoteric art is art that's informed by the artist's spirituality. So, and all these pieces are in some way when you walk around town, and that's what sets it apart from other places. To me, the town, like, is speaking to the whole person and to different kinds of people through all these different kinds of sculpture and pieces all around. So, and then even having Paul Tillich buried here, his ashes. So, yeah, I think that this place feels different because it's infused with meaning about things that are more abstract, that aren't clear about our beliefs, things we can't prove, things that we want to believe in.
Yeah.
Mythology.
Right.
So you mentioned the history of the town. I would just add, and this is one of my favorite parts of this community, is there's this kind of roller coaster of the leading beliefs here, right? So it starts with the harmonists, who are very religiously informed in their practices. And then when Robert Owen bought the community, he was basically atheist, but believed very strongly in quality of life and morality and what a life should look like. And then you go back to Jane, who was almost both of those things. She was secular, personally very religious, but spiritual more than anything. So I think, at least here, how things have changed over time is that there's always been a shared belief and morality and vision, but it wasn't necessarily always religious.
Yes, Tom? Tom asks, is there a new Jane Owen in town? So maybe who's the next
Yeah.
visionary for the city? Or is it a group of people, or how's that
Yeah,
work?
thank you. Yeah, I would go there. Jane Ellen would be a very hard other thing to find. Jane was that, and I've known her since I first moved here. And she was an anomaly, somebody with vision. She was amazingly intelligent, incredible educational background, and all the resources to do basically whatever she wanted. I asked her once why she didn't stay in Houston, because I traveled to Houston with her a few times, and we'd go through the gardens there, and she could name every sculpture by sight, who did it. Oh, and of course she knew them and went to school with their son or whatever. And but to find another person like that would be. Now, to find a group of people that could fill that void in a little slice in a lot of ways, yeah, maybe. and those people are showing up, and it's wonderful to see. Because I know when Jane passed, everybody kind of was like, is this town just going to fall apart and fall into the river? And it hasn't. There are people leading the community now in their own ways that never even knew her, which is amazing to see them picking up pieces of her legacy and being inspired by her that didn't get to meet her.
Any other questions? Yes. So the question is about more of how can regular people, maybe without resources, a lot of resources, do utopian things?
Well, I don't come of means, so a lot of it is just self-guided. When I was 20, I joined a board of a CDC. I was interested, so I did the research and looked into these things because I want my life to matter to me. And how do I make my life matter? Well, it wasn't enough to just make money. I wanted to do something more. So any regular person can go and make those connections. It's not quick work. I mean, I didn't get paid for 8 years, and either did Jim. But we believed in it, so we stuck with it and built it and didn't give up because we wanted to learn. So any normal person can be connected to resources, can find out about CDCs, as long as they're motivated to learn and willing to sacrifice and also be open to failure and be rejected, because you get rejected over and over by funders, by the CDCs, or they don't like this or they don't like that. So that it just, any regular person can do it. It just takes time.
I would say the same thing for the bridge project. When I first started getting involved in that, it was just because everything else had failed up to that time, so there really was nothing to lose. But I remember calling senators' offices and the bridge people in Louisville, and they would always say, "Who are you with?" And I'm like, we. I'd always say we because it sounded, better, but that wasn't really the reality of it. And I don't know where you're from, but I know in Indiana there's like the Creating Places grants where you can crowdfund if it's a placemaking project, crowdfund a certain portion of it, and then the government will match you. So there are some really good funding opportunities out there too.
Though I think that's great, I just want to acknowledge that, a lot of the communities we're working in, it's a privilege to be here and a luxury to be able to do this kind of work. And there's a lot of, marginalized communities that we're doing the work with that don't have necessarily that kind of privilege to be able to do that kind of work.
Right. So I think we're going to wrap up here. I do want each of the three of you to tell people where they can go to find a little more information. So, Chate?
You can find more information at bigcar.org, and APLR is the program.
Chris?
meritchase.com.
And if they're following the story of the bridge, how do we do that?
We've been, it's tricky. Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, we try to be cautious about what we say because we don't know what's going to happen yet. So newspapers, I
Just
guess.
watch the newspaper. That's
Yeah,
where I saw
exactly.
it. Okay, well, how about a hand for this panel?